Greg Maloney at Ducks and Bucks too. He's a local guy out of Mount Clemens, so we're supporting one of our own. He's a good guy.
What are you selling those for retail?
I think they're 400. Where do you guys want me at out here? I feel like I need to dance or something. All right, that was a great intro, thanks. Let's see, where should I start here?
Get your auger out, put a hole in it.
What's that?
Get your auger out, put a hole in the floor.
Yeah, let's do this little Q&A first. How many guys out here fish with electronics already? Like a flasher or an LCD unit out on the ice? Okay. How about GPSs? You guys use GPSs out there? Okay. What about cell phones? Do you use your cell phones like Google Earth, Maps, anything like that? Avionics software? Okay, that's cool. That'll work. I'm just gonna do like I'm gonna try to tailor this to kind of what you guys maybe want to hear. How's that? Is that good? I think it's on. Testing? Can everybody hear me like this? No. Is this good? I can do it without the mic. It might be easier for me anyways. I did a lot of tournament fishing for a long time before I started SDI. How's that? That was kind of scary. But I'm not here to really talk about the tournament scene at all, other than to say I learned a lot when I was out there. But probably what I did more was I took stuff that I learned here from you guys and from a lot of the guys that I grew up fishing with. And so that's probably where I'll start off with, is some of the techniques that are pretty local around here, but maybe I might take it for granted that everybody knows them, but I'm always amazed in the store when I'm explaining stuff to guys that I learned here that maybe they weren't even exposed to yet. One of the things that I learned out here that was pretty novel, or at least I found out it was novel when I started traveling around, was tube jigs and how a lot of the guys around here fish them. And it's not the normal way that like they fish them down south or anywhere else in the country. Actually, I've never seen it done anywhere else before like it. How many guys know what I'm talking about here right now? I saw some guys kind of smile.
We make them look like a wiggler.
Yeah. And what do you get? What do you guys call it? Squidding? I've heard some of the guys call it squidding. Okay. What it is it works fantastic. What it is you take your tube jig and you actually fish it upside down. So you fish it with the tentacles pointed up towards your line. I've got one of these rods rigged here with it. You can use different types of spoons. We've got a spoon that we sell it's a long brass spoon, but I grew up using like a little forage minnow or like a #2 willow leaf, and we would solder them up real heavy so that you had good weight. But basically, with the tentacles up, when you drop that jig down, it's going to swim off to the side, kind of like a Ken's hook or some of these other spoons will.
Even with the extra weight.
Even with the extra weight.
That's why I don't put the weight in, because I want it to flutter more. The weight, it still flutters.
And what happens is, because the tentacles are on the upside, every time you jig that bait, those tentacles flare out. So you can imagine the tentacles are kind of puffing every time that you pop that bait. And since you can swim that bait out, you can actually let it hit the bottom, and then you can kind of hop it back to the center of the hole. So I don't know if they think it's a wiggler, or if they think it's a crayfish, or what they think it is, but they really like it. And we take a lot of big perch on it. Now the colors that most of the time that we use are like a pumpkin pepper brown, pumpkin pepper with like a little red nose on it. I'll pass some of those around. I've got them in here in the box, and I'll let you see the tubes that we use. Got too many goodies in here. Anybody know what these are? I know a lot of you guys have bought them in the last couple of years. Yeah. These are Catulas. I think I'm wearing a Catula hat right now. But these are always in my box. These are probably the handiest creepers that I've ever had. This pair is actually, one of these has got a slice in it that I put in it on the first day that I got them with my auger, and they still haven't broke yet. So, but this is basically my fishing rig that I brought in here. So I figured that was kind of a good way to do a seminar. It was just kind of like with a lot of the stuff that I would normally take with me on any given outing.
Did you cut the rest of that top bucket off? So it's just the top, or do you have the bucket inside?
No, this is 2 buckets.
Right. Okay, so you do keep...
Yep, so you get a 5-gallon bucket, and then you got a 6-gallon bucket on the bottom. And it's a little bit taller than a standard 7,
Yes.
is the way it comes out.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, what it does, it allows me to put the battery down in the bottom, and then I got storage down there too. So I guess I was taking that for granted.
So you don't just cut it right below the rim there to get the extra height. You use the storage below.
I use the storage below, and it's like a dry storage then. Eventually I'll find these tubes that I was going to show you guys. If not, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to pass this rod around. That rod's also got basically a modified fly reel on there. That's another thing that's kind of come on the scene. It's not as important here locally because we're fishing pretty shallow water most of the time. We're fishing most of our perch fishing is under 10 feet. But when you start fishing deeper, what you find is that your spinning reels will twist your line. And so that line twist ends up going down to your bait. Doesn't matter what kind of bait you have, that line twist will eventually make its way down there. And what it does is it causes that bait to spin. And when that bait spins, the fish they won't hit it. So what you end up having to do is you end up having to keep it moving to stop it from spinning. Well, there's days where they'll hit it when it's moving, but there's other days where you have to let it sit sometimes, at least for a second. So what the fly reels do is they don't twist the line up so that you don't get that spin, so that the fish will hit it all the time, so you don't have to worry about it. This is another one that's on this reel as well, another fly reel type. So anyways, that rod that's going around has got the famous upside down tube jig on it, which like I said is fantastic for perch, but I've caught everything on that. I've caught walleye on it, you can change the color of the tube fish for crappies. The brown ones though are a really good perch killer. That one, no, it's just a standard, like a number. It's a long spoon. The spoon itself is long that's on there. Yeah, but it's got a nice action where it flutters out. It'll swim away from the hole. Like I said, I grew up using like 4-inch minnows or just number 2 willows will fit in there. The only downside to those is that sometimes they'll split the tube. So these brass ones that we found are really long and thin, so they thread it inside that tube really nice. So you don't split the tube open and crack it. How many guys here fish with hard beads? Really, that's all? I would have thought more. How about, what, bead spoons, Ken's hooks, McGathy's, Gusters?
What's the other Guster?
Guster spoons?
Gusters and
Ken's, yeah. I know Dennis, the ones I got here are all Ken's, I think. But I've been fishing these for a long time too. This is another thing that's local that you will not find anywhere else in the country. Although you'll find them there now because we sell them on the website, and I've sold them to all parts of the globe. It's amazing. After there was an article written last year by the Inn Fishermen about, they called it, I think actually Joe Baylog wrote it, another local bass pro here. And he wrote the article on the bead spoons, and it went viral last year. They don't have to, the bead spoons they work a lot like that soft plastic that I just passed out, that upside down tube, as far as the way the action is on these baits. most of these bead spoons will swim out away from the hole and then come back. Okay, so when you drop them down on a semi-tight line, the spoon takes off to the side. Some of them will flutter and go straight down, but most of them really are designed to take off and go out away from the hole. So think of it like you're casting underneath the ice, right? Because when we're ice fishing, we're limited. We're fishing vertical, like for the most part, right? You're only fishing that little bit of water right underneath you. So if you can take that and you can increase it so you're fishing out 2 feet from the hole, you're covering more water, right? And if you're fishing a little bit deeper and you can even get it out 3 or 4 feet from the hole in all directions, all of a sudden you're fishing like 12 feet of water, right? So you're not fishing just that little tiny 8-inch circle anymore underneath your hole. So that's a big difference. You know, it doesn't seem like much, but it's huge. So anything that can take your bait away from the hole, even a jig and wrap's the same thing. You know, you're going around in a circle, you're covering more water, you're presenting that bait to more fish. So both that tube jig and these bead spoons, I'll pass these around. Like I said, I think most of these are Ken's hooks. They're all different shapes and sizes. But I'll talk a little bit more about what makes those really special, because it's not just that you're fishing around and fishing more area, but you're also fishing top to bottom, so you're covering more of your water column, because the way those are fished are you're kind of ripping them up. That bait creates a lot of vibration when it's pulsing up, it's spinning, it's kind of pumping, kind of like a lipless crankbait for all you bass fishing guys. So it's, yeah, well, exactly. Well, you guys, I catch a lot of walleyes on lipless cranks too. So especially early in the season, the same thing, you know, that makes the bass bite, makes the perch bite too. But, so you get all this vibration coming out of the bait, it's swimming out sideways, you're fishing top to bottom because you're ripping it up and dropping it down, so your fish are seeing it from farther away. And you also get the chase reflex going on these fish, especially panfish. They really like to chase, okay? It's kind of like this teasing the cat kind of thing. So when that bait's taken off to the side, and those fish see it and they take off after the bait, they no sooner get up to the bait and it stops and it turns directions now and it's coming back towards the hole. Well, what they think is to get away from them, so they're not going to let that happen. So they take off after it too, and as soon as it stops in the bottom of the hole is usually when they grab it. Or sometimes we'll give it a little jiggle to, you know, make them commit and bite it. But here's the real beauty of the bead spoon. Not only does it make the fish hit, but once you hook that fish and you pull them out of the water, the barb doesn't go all the way up into their mouth. So by thumping the fish back down on the ice, you get them back off, you go right back down the hole again. And when you got one perch, how many do you normally have down there? Usually a few, right? Or a bunch, right? Well, if you can get that first one to bite and you can get them out fast enough, you can literally get a frenzy going down there. And they'll all be, it's like they're down there waiting to go for the ride up and out. So the real trick is with those bead spoons is you get that school and you literally work the whole school up as high as you can. So you're literally trying to tease that school and get them pulled up off the bottom so that you don't even have as far to go down to them. So you can get that school pulled up right underneath the ice. You'll see guys out there sometimes, right? They're down there and all you see is this. We've all seen it, right? You see that, the real good guys, you don't even see that because they keep their elbows tucked in. So the guys from a distance can't see them, right? So, but you know when they're crouched over out there what they're doing. Most of the time that's what they're doing is they're pulling fish on those bead spoons. And they got this school worked up. And if you get especially some of those bigger Kens, I like to use the big heavy ones because after you thump them on the ice, the spoon is heavy enough itself so that it pushes itself out of the fish's mouth really easy. Or if you get one that takes it really deep, the spoon is long enough you can grab it and just flick them off. So the idea is you got that school of fish up there, you got them excited, and you're pulling them out of the water just as fast as you can get your line down there. And it's almost silly how many fish you can catch and how fast. And usually big ones too, they're hitting that hard bead. Now,
that weight of that spoon gets it down fast.
The weight of the spoon gets it down fast too, exactly. But sometimes there's a lot of the newer ones that are out on the market like Diamond Willow. We saw one called a shad spoon that are really light, and they're also a bead spoon. But they're a little bit different. Those don't take off to the side as much as they flutter on the drop. So it's a little different presentation with some of them, but yeah, most of the solid brass ones and the brass and chromes, they'll get down really, really fast, and you can feel them too. So this isn't a bobber fishing thing. This is a tight line thing. And I kind of laughed when I was traveling around on the tournament circuit, because there'd always be this big controversy with some of the old timers about this tight lining, this Michigan tight lining we would hear all the time. And there's been articles written about it, and I still chuckle, because the real tight lining started here. The real tight lining started out here, like on Lake St Clair in southeast Michigan, with the guys using these bead spoons. That was a real tight lining, but a lot of these guys are, you know, bait fishing, and they don't use a bobber, so they call it tight lining. But this is true tight lining, right? It's just, you're just down and out. And the old time guys that I learned to fish from, they didn't even use carbon rods and fiberglass and all this stuff. I mean, I think probably the first time I did it, I was using an old arrow shaft with a willow. I think it was cattails, like a cattail handle. Any of you guys remember those rods with just the aluminum arrow shaft with the eye on the end and like Dacron line, right? And we didn't have reels. I mean, we would literally, I called it the windmill technique, where you'd pull up as far as you could, you drop your rod down underneath, you'd raise it. I mean, I can remember being on Simcoe in like 25 feet of water doing that the first time, and a bird's nest of line all over the place, and everything, with my buddy going next to me, just going like crazy. But anyway, so that's the whole bead spoon thing, is that you're fishing away from the hole, you got the chase reflex going from the fish, you're fishing the full water color, at least you're fishing vertical, and so you're ripping the line up where more fish can see it, you got vibration, and then you got just crazy efficiency to get these fish in and out. Now the downside sometimes is trying to figure out what color they're going to bite, because believe it or not, they get really picky about bead color and blade size and blade color sometimes. But when you get them dialed in and you get the right bait down there to them, it's phenomenal. It works to really fish, or it really helps to fish with a group of guys when doing it. Because just like when you guys are out there trolling for walleyes, right, and somebody gets a hot night crawler harness color going, you call your buddies up and you tell them, right? Once you get on the phone and tell them, maybe not. There's a lot of silence, right? So maybe not. But anyways, we're out there fishing in a group. If we get a hot bead color going, then, we all generally try to share so everybody can get in on the love. I've also been known to carry a whole pocket full of different colored beads, usually a little skull can, and then I've got the magic Leatherman, and usually a Bic lighter in my pocket, so that you can crush the old bead off and you can heat up the hook and put a new bead on in a hurry, to change colors rather than carrying 500 different spoons with you. I'd rather carry 500 beads in my pocket. You can also use what they'll call a soft bead or a Jensen egg on there. How many guys have used the Jensen eggs or soft beads? About the same number of guys. It's the same deal. I mean, you got an egg down there, although it's not as easy to get the fish back off, because with the soft bead on there, a lot of times you'll get the whole barb up in their mouth, so they don't come off nearly as quick. But sometimes the fish like that softer bead; they'll hang on to it longer. So the soft bead, you can also use the soft bead on like a jig and wrap. How many guys use jig and wraps or little swimming minnow type baits? Use them for walleye too, right? I mean, the bigger sizes like the 5s and the 7s and the 9s. For perch, we use a lot smaller ones. The samples I've got here right now are, these are what we call our Polish perch fry. It's kind of a goofy name, kind of a long story, but the company that makes them is in Poland. And they started making musky baits for us a couple of years ago. And I asked them if they could make, their musky bait, it was called the Polish perch. And so I said, well, why don't you make me like a baby Polish perch for ice fishing? So that's where the Polish perch fry came from. But it's basically a little jig and wrap, little tiny ones, like an inch long. Sometimes those are fantastic. They swim in a circle just like the big jig and wrap. Sometimes that's the only thing the fish will eat. I don't know why. I don't know why that, you know, they get so, it's not like they, you know, it's whatever their mood is, I guess, but personally I prefer not to catch fish involving, when I have treble hooks out on the ice, because it just takes too long to get them on and off. But sometimes you got to do what you got to do to put fish in the bucket. So if that's what they want to eat, that's what I give them. But it's basic. It just swims in a circle. You can tip it with a couple of spikes on the bottom or whatnot. But you're keeping it constantly moving. So a lot of times the fish will respond to that. But usually you're fishing low and you're not fishing the full water column. So it's really for when the fish are, you know, down holding near bottom. You know, you're not fishing a bunch of fish at different levels or whatnot, and maybe they're more turned off. So that's when I'll pull that out and use those guys. Let's see. Talking about when fish are a little bit negative or neutral. This next bait I've got in here, it's probably going to be all tangled up. This is called a chain dropper, or a dropper chain. Anybody ever fish with a bait called a hally? Okay. Basically, this is like a hally, only this is my version of a hally. Basically a lead bait is what the hally is. It's like a lead spoon, and then it's got a little chain, like a jewelry chain, like what your wife would wear, and then there's a hook on the end. Now, the hooks that I've got here have got a little jewel on them and some bright colored epoxy. It's really like it's a glass bead. But the idea behind this bait is you've got flash, you've got a hook down there with a little bit of extra attractor, and you put live bait on it. Works really good when the fish are negative, meaning that they really don't seem like they want to eat anything. What you can do with this, you can jig it. You know, jig it a couple of times pretty sharp, and then you let it sit. The way I like to fish it is dead sticking it. So basically I'd have that rod sitting there like that with one of these on it, and I'd flip it a couple of times really hard, then I'd let it sit. Then I might be over in another hole and I might be jigging, fishing with a bead spoon or something else. But don't know exactly why it works as well as it does when the fish are really negative, other than the bait, because it's got the chain on it, it doesn't like get blown away from you. You guys ever see when the fish come in and they look like they want to eat, but they almost like blow on the bait and it actually like blows away from them? Does that drive you nuts? I mean, I've had it with the bead spoon. It'll drive me crazy sometimes because they just miss it, you know, and you start yelling at them, eat it, you know, because they come in and they're missing it. With that chain on there, they don't seem to miss it. So when they come in, they just end up sucking it in, and it's, like I said, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but it works. So I don't like to argue with stuff that works. I try to understand it, but if it works, I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to pass these two little, one of them is individual and the other ones are in bags. I'll pass them around. I'll pass this one. You guys aren't getting any attention over here. There's a couple of smaller sizes than that one. That one's like the medium size. The thing with the size, you're just kind of matching the size of the spoon, however deep you're fishing, so that you can get it down there. I don't think anything other than that matters on it, size-wise. You're just trying to feel it. No size comments over here. There's children in the audience. What else do I want to talk about? I've just got some other samples of jigging baits in here. For me, the biggest size that I go up to on the jigging rap for perch is like a number 5. This is a size 3. And I get this other bait in here called a ZT Minnow. It's pretty cool. This one's been good for perch too. Like I said, the only downside for me on these kind of baits is I don't like treble hooks and perch. Unless I'm getting really big perch, you know, you getting those ones that you got to wrestle between your legs before you can put them in the bucket. I don't mind taking them off of a treble hook, but I hate to do it on like 7s and 8s, you know. But But hey, if that's what they want to eat.
These are the guys up.
These are actually, this is one of my brands, you know, but it's basically it's a knockoff of a jigging Rap, is what it is.
Do you fish those with single hooks for the perch?
You can put a single hook on the bottom. Another nice trick is that dropper spoon that I'm passing around with that chain. You can take that treble hook off of these baits and put that single hook with the chain on the bottom. There's actually been a lot of guys doing that this year, and it's worked out really nice, especially with a lot of these smaller fish, so you're not going crazy taking all these little guys off of that treble hook, because that's what makes me nuts, is if I gotta take all that time, you know, you get one of these little 4-inchers off, and meanwhile you're taking the 4-incher, you no sooner set the hook on that 4-incher, you get them up, you're taking it off, and you look down the hole, and there's like 5 10-inch fish down there, you know, going, why'd you take the bait away? You know, where'd it go? That's usually what happens, right? Let's see, the next one I got up here, I pull out of my bag of tricks, is, these are called noogie tails. And you know how I mentioned the lure Jensen eggs, so the soft eggs? Yeah, that's what the noogie is. Yeah. And the name came from a buddy of mine, Phil Morse. Anybody in here know Phil? Phil is a former national champion from North American Ice Fishing Circuit. I grew up fishing with Phil and his son. Phil probably taught me, Phil taught me so much about...
No relation?
Phil Morse?
No relation to the cigarette people?
No, M-O-R-S-E. He lives over in St. Clair Shores off of Ardmore. But, man, if I can give anybody credit for most of what I've learned over the last 40 years, it's probably Phil. But we wanted a Jensen egg with a tail. After traveling around fishing and getting exposed to all these little tiny soft plastics that we were using, we came up with the brainy idea that, you know, a Jensen egg was really easy to hook onto a hook. But all these little plastics were driving us nuts because you had to thread them on there and using these little tiny fine wire hooks and stuff. So we came up with the idea with one of the manufacturers in Wisconsin, Little Adam. We asked him to make us a Jensen egg with a tail. And so that's what he did. He made us these noogies, and the rest is history. I wish I was getting royalties on it, but I'm not. But I did get the pleasure of fishing them the first time in New York. You can catch everything on the noogies. I don't think there's anything I haven't caught on a noogie tail. I mean, I've caught lake trout on a noogie tail, I've caught walleye, I've hooked muskies. I haven't landed one on a noogie tail yet. But I haven't caught a sturgeon, no. I have not caught a sturgeon on a noogie tail. I've caught trout, caught steelhead, caught brown trout. But it's a great bait, and it comes in 3 different sizes. It comes in a little micro, but the one that's going around is the original one. It's got a long flat tail on it. And there's a great big one that we have as well that some of the guys use them for walleye in the Detroit River. But they'll stack the balls on the jig. They don't use just one on there. I don't have any samples of that in here, but if you're by the shore and you ask me, I'll show you how it's rigged. It's kind of unique.
Hey John, how do you hook the little arrow with the tail?
Good question. With all soft plastics, probably one of the most critical things is getting that thing straight, horizontal. The biggest mistake I think that guys make fishing soft plastics in general is that they don't get it on there straight. So one of 2 things happens. When the bait's not on there straight, or the tail is kinked, or it's not all in line, when you jig that bait, it's going to want to spin, or it's going to want to go in a tight little circle. Not like a jig and Rapala circle, but like a tight, unnatural circle, right? Fish generally don't just like turn around down there under the water, right? Nothing really moves that way down there. So if your jig is doing that, the fish know that's not normal. The other thing is it gives you crazy line twist when you're dropping the jig down and when you're bringing it up. So you want to try to get that tail on there as straight as you can, and it gives it a nice natural action. And while we're going down that road, one of the other things that happens a lot of times when we set guys up with fishing with soft plastics we're generally setting them up to fish with a horizontal jig. Okay, now I learned to fish here with everything I fished with when I first started out was vertical style, like the Ken's hook. When I mean vertical is, you know, it's in line with the hook coming out the bottom, just like that tube jig I passed around. Okay, that's a vertical jig. Plastics, for the most part, when I'm fishing plastics, I'm going to be fishing them with a horizontal jig. And this will be a good example right now because this horizontal jig probably isn't hanging very horizontal. I'm going to exaggerate it and make it not hang horizontal. And I know this is tiny and nobody's going to really be able to see it out there, but you can play around with it when I pass it around. But what kind of knots does everybody tie here? Who ties a loop knot onto their ice fishing jig? Who uses a fast snap or a little clip or snap to put your jigs on? Okay. Most of you guys, I take it, then tie direct to it, like with a Palomar knot or a trilene or a clinch or something like that. The rest of you? Okay. Here's the problem with, and I use a Palomar knot probably 90% of the time. I'll use a loop knot or a Palomar knot. Now, when you tie hard to that hook, meaning like with a clinch or a Palomar, what ends up happening is you're restricting that jig. That jig is, depending on where that knot is on that eye, is going to determine what that jig does. Now this jig right now is not hanging horizontal. And that jig is a balanced jig. It should hang horizontal. But because that knot is pulled towards the front of the jig, it'll never hang horizontal. It's always going to hang goofy like that. Now when you're fishing with plastics, that's going to determine how your plastics sit in the water. So the jig has to hang horizontal first before the plastic can be horizontal in the water. So the trick here is I just pulled that knot and pulled it towards the hook, and you guys can see how beautiful and horizontal it's hanging now? That's all controlled by the knot. Now, same thing happens when you're jigging walleyes in the river. It might not be quite as noticeable, okay, because you got a much heavier jig and you're banging bottom and all that, but it still plays a role in, you know, in your bait presentation. So, you know, it's just one of those things. It's one of the questions I'll ask people, you know, if they're not having success with plastics. A lot of times it's how their jig is hanging or not hanging that makes the difference. The loop knot, if you tie a loop knot, your jig is going to hang based on as good as the jig is balanced. And not all jigs are the same. Okay, most of the tungsten jigs will hang nice and horizontal. Some lead jigs, they're just not designed to be that way, so they're going to hang on an angle anyways. But you can cheat them by tying a knot and pulling that knot towards the hook too. So you can take a jig that doesn't want to hang horizontal, you can force it to hang horizontal by pulling that knot over. The loop knot's going to be just however the hook hangs. Same thing with your fast snaps. That little fast snap that you put in there, if the jig naturally hangs horizontal, it's going to hang horizontal with the fast snap. If it doesn't, it's gonna be tallywampus. It's gonna be at a goofy angle. So the jig's gonna control your plastics, and if the plastic's not on straight, it's gonna be on a goofy angle. And fish, for some reason, don't want to eat it if it's not right. Let's see. Other cool stuff in my bag of tricks in here. UV light. Anybody here ever fish glow baits? Stuff that glows in the dark? Okay. This is an ultraviolet light. It charges up glow stuff really fast. I mean, crazy fast. More than a bunch of daylight will. I'm not going to say a lot more about it than that, other than it does work and it does make a difference. Out there on the ice in the middle of a day on a bright sunny day, your jig's getting charged up like crazy every time you bring it out and expose it to daylight anyways, okay? But if you're inside your shack, inside your shanty, and you're wanting to charge your jig, this is a pretty efficient way. Sometimes I'll cheat and I'll just scoot the jig out to the corner where I get a bunch of light coming in and I'll charge it up. But it does make a big difference to the fish. If you're fishing a glow jig and it's charged properly, it gets their attention. But I'll pass this around. Just an ultraviolet light. There's a bunch of them on the market now. So you just want to make sure that it's a real UV light. For a while there, some of the companies were passing off lights that just had blue LEDs in them, and they didn't charge anything. But they were charging full price for them, of course. Just some more plastics I'll pass around. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on them. Little tiny tubes that I'll use. Here's those brown tubes in here and some other ones, some wedgies. But plastics do work. They have a time and a place. I will always have a pocket full of spikes with me though if I'm trying to catch fish for the freezer. I won't rely totally on hard, artificial stuff. Here's a new bait that we developed and launched this year, and it was kind of within mind for the guys that fish docks and fish plastics too. But it doesn't look like anything special if you're used to fishing with regular lead baits. But that's the first tungsten bait on the market that's got a little wire keeper on it, which is what makes it special. Like I said, which doesn't sound like much, but to the guys that have been fishing tungsten as long as I have, we never had anything in a tungsten bait that would hold our plastics in place. Nobody ever made one. So we finally did, so there's a little wire keeper on there now that holds the plastics in place. We call it getting your pants pulled down, when your plastic gets pulled out of position. And once that happens, the fish won't eat it. So it's a big deal if you're down there and you got a bunch of fish down there and you roll one and he pulls your pants down, pulls the plastic off, or partially off, you got to bring it back up and reset it. Well, while you're doing that, that big fish just swam off. So if that plastic, well, how many of you guys fish finesse minnows for jigging walleyes? What happens when you roll that fish and that plastic gets pulled tallywampus on you? Anybody glue their plastics on? For glue? Yeah, that works good. We'll do that with our ice. That's what we used to have to do with our ice plastics to keep them from getting pulled off. So, let's do Q&A before I get kicked out of here, because I'm sure you guys got questions and are tired of hearing me just babble on aimlessly.
Question for you concerning something that made it simple for several years is I'll be fishing my Ken's hook, and the guy sitting next to me in the shack, 3 feet from me in the shack, is fishing a minnow on a slip bottom. Fish come in, I catch one, he catches 4 or 5. I switch my Ken's hook off and drop a minnow down. We catch 2 or 3 and the fish leave. It took me 3 years to convince him to put the minnow away. If we're both fishing Ken's hooks, the fish will stick around a lot longer. I guess my question is, how do you get people to forget about the past, to move on? And do you see that too? I mean, I would think it made a big difference. When he finally put the minnows away after 3 years, I ended up, and he razzed me. I'm catching 5 to every one you're catching. When he finally put the minnows away, we caught the same amount, and it was a lot of fish.
Well, the thing that, as far as getting them to switch over, it's going to be, that's hard to do. But the reality is why it's happening, why you catch more fish when you're both using the artificial baits, it's really because you've got that flow going, okay? Whereas what'll happen is when you only got one guy, well, if you got 2 guys fishing bead hooks right next to each other and you can get that school all fired up and feeding, you always have somebody's always got their line in the water. Okay, I mean that's the whole thing is you've always got some flash and some attraction down there. But as soon as you throw a guy in fishing minnows, he catches one, now he's up there for 3 minutes messing around trying to put another minnow on. Okay, so you just don't have the attraction quality staying down there all the time. It's just like if you get a fish that swallows your bait really deep, by the time you get back down there, sometimes they're all gone.
And the fish will prefer the minnows most of the time. I'll
Yep.
call them in,
Oh yeah.
and he'd start catching them. So when I switch over to a minnow, the bite would kind of slow down and then move off. But if we kept the candles, it'll stick around longer, like you say. So
It's an activity
it makes
thing.
the water longer.
It's just an activity thing, yep.
Okay.
It goes back to the basic principle of why that bead spoon works so well. It's about getting up and down really fast and getting them off the hook. So you're keeping them excited.
As much as attraction, it's efficiency.
It's efficiency, yep. It's a school of fish down there, and if you can keep their attention longer, they're all gonna be, it's like that Toy Story thing, that the kids show, right, where they drop that claw down in and all the little aliens are worshiping the claw. That's what, like, literally those perch down there are waiting. They're waiting for you to drop the bait back down to them. It's almost ridiculous. More questions? Man, I bored everybody to sleep tonight. That's good. Okay.
I like to fish perch in the summer with minnows, and we're allowed 3 rods. And I'd like to dedicate my 3rd rod to jigging with something, without a minnow. Does that ever work?
Yep, jigging wrap works really good for that. And you don't even have to jig it, you can just put it in the rod holder. The only downside is if you get, a lot of times out there in the summertime we're fishing weed beds, or close to weed beds, and so the jigging wrap will get hung up. But if you're like out there by the St. Clair Light and you're on a flat, like on a mud flat or something, you don't have a lot of weeds, you can set that jigging wrap in a rod holder and just set it up just above the weed tops. And as the boat is moving, that jigging wrap is just down there swimming its nice little circle, and you don't even have to worry about it. Just the boat action alone will work it. But I've also done good out there jigging small teardrops with plastics too. And tube jigs work really nice. Fishing out there for perch if you want to jig, from the boat. And you don't have to tip them with anything, although you can put maybe just a little pinch of night crawler sometimes on the tube jig. I've caught some really nice perch using tubes out there. Other questions?
Plastics.
Yes.
I've never thought of bluegill on plastics. If I were to try it, they don't buy my tube jigs in plastics. Those little tails, like little itty bitty finesse fish, you catch many with them? If you do, is it an active thing or is it just let it set?
Bluegills are a special creature. They really like to chase. And so the trick with bluegills is playing keep away with them, especially when you're fishing plastics. With the electronics, it's easy, or I should say easier, because when the fish comes in on the electronics, I can see them, so I'm sight fishing every fish. So when the fish comes in on the electronics, I'll start to pull it away from him, especially with plastics. And the bluegill, he's going to chase. And sometimes you can actually swim it around in the hole, and he'll chase horizontally. So sometimes we'll take the rod tip. This is a really long rod to do this, but we'll fish with a short rod. Hope I didn't hurt myself. And we'll literally point the rod down in the hole, and we'll swim it around in the hole.
So you fire them up with plastics?
Yeah, you can fire them up. I mean, they'll just nuke it sometimes too. I mean, they'll just come in and destroy it. But generally, they like to chase. They'll hit it on the fall a lot of times. But your size goes down a lot. You have to downsize for the gills. I mean, much smaller baits typically than we'll use for perch. Although I've caught plenty of them on the noogie tails. I mean, the noogie I've caught everything on. But little ice mites, the J&S ice mites that we have, the little Versa mites. But generally it's a smaller bait for the gills. I should say something too, because I normally make a big deal about this, and I didn't tonight, is that one of the key things for fishing, if you really want to improve your catch, is always keeping your bait above the fish. Fish, especially all fish, walleyes too, all their eyes are on top of their head. And so many guys associate, the first thing you guys will do out there is go to the bottom. And that's the last place I go. I never fish the bottom first. I always fish top to bottom, because fish are always going to see the bait above them. They never can see a bait when it's below them. Their eyes are on top of their head, not on the bottom, right? So fish down to your fish. And your aggressive fish are going to be on top generally anyways, too. So those are the fish you really want to target. So fishing down to the fish, you know, even if it's just a slow drop, don't go right to the bottom. Start fishing down to your fish. And if you're starting to drop down at 5 feet of water and your first fish comes at, you know, nipple height when you're standing up, well, the next time you go down, you're not going to go right to the bottom, right? You're going to be fishing to that height. So, I mean, you should. You're going to want to try to pull those aggressive fish. So always focus, you know, mentally on fishing above the fish. And again, with electronics, it's easy because I already can see the fish that are down there. So I'm going to focus on holding the bait up above them and trying to make them come up. It also makes them feed more aggressively if you can get them to come up to your bait as opposed to putting the bait down to them. Because there's this risk factor for the fish. When he's down there, he's safe. Okay, he's going to be down in the weeds or whatever. He's secure down there. He's in cover. But when he comes up, it's decision time. He's not going to come up there and just linger and mess around because Mr. Pike or Mr. Muskie's going to take him out from the side. So when he finally commits to come up to see that bait, he's probably going to eat it. Because he wants to get up there and eat it and get back down to cover again. So if you can get him to come up for the bait, you're going to get much more aggressive strikes too. I mean, he's going to come up, grab it, and try to get right back down. So, and the other thing is too, pulling fish from a school, if you can get the fish to leave their buddies and come up and eat, then you're not yanking them away from their buddies, if that makes any sense, right? So if you get a really tight school of fish and you go right down into that school and you yank one right out of there, it tends to make the other guys a little more nervous. Not all the time, but it does, you know, on average. So if you can get them to leave the school first, you can pluck them off one at a time without their buddies even knowing about it. It's to your, you know, it's kind of to your advantage to do that too. So I always try to pull the fish out of the school and make them come up.
Cameras versus Vexillon.
Always Vexilar for me, or always Fish Finder. For mobility reason. I call it the 30-second rule. Even if it's not like with my ice hopper unit, even if you're just, you know, with a Vexilar with the regular case on it, you're still going to be way more mobile than you are with a camera. And it's not that I don't love cameras. I've got all different kinds of cameras. But for me, it's about, if it takes you more than 30 seconds to move or do anything, odds of you doing it go way down. So what ends up happening is you get comfortable. You're comfortable sitting there watching the camera, you're seeing some fish, maybe they're biting, maybe they're not, but at least you're watching TV. But with the flasher, there's really no excuse not to move other than drilling a hole. But there's probably a hole over there anyways that somebody else drilled, so you're always better off just making a move to, you know, to try to find the fish. So for me, it's no question, it's always going to be the flasher. And you're not limited by water clarity. You're not limited by which way it's pointing. You know, there's so many other reasons why you can literally see more with a flasher or a fish finder than you can with a camera. Although there's been situations like in deep water, you know, where I got perch that are down there that are biting like really, really light. And usually what I use it for is when the fish are biting really, really light, all I'm caring about is I want to see when the hook actually goes in their mouth versus, you know, that's the time when I've seen the most value out of a camera, is like those kind of deep water applications, but otherwise it's going to be the flasher.
And all the cameras we buy are viewing horizontal.
But I never use them that way though.
You use yours vertically?
Yeah, I down view.
So you're on top down view?
Yes.
Because you get up better and see further.
You
higher right.
You can see further. The question was, if I use a camera, am I going to look sideways with it or am I going to down view? And for me, I'm always going to down view. And a couple of reasons why I would down view versus the side view. One, down view gives you a bigger field of view, so you're looking just like the flasher is looking. You're looking at a big circular area down there, so you can see a whole lot more. The other one is I'm not going to drop it down as far. And so that means I'm more mobile again, because I'm not putting it all the way to the bottom. I might only, if the water is really clear, I might only be putting it halfway down to the fish. And the third reason why it would, with less camera line down, I'm less likely to get tangled too. And if I do get tangled, it's quicker for me to get it up if I'm not all the way down to the bottom and I got less cable hanging all over inside of my shack as well. So it's all about efficiency at that point.
You're not going to get your buddies' jigs on the camera necessarily.
That too.
But like you say, more mobile is.
I have had some amazing times though fishing with a camera. I mean, I've fished cribs and stuff in other states where, I mean, Michigan it's not legal to do it, but in a lot of other states like Wisconsin, Minnesota, they'll put log cabins basically down underneath the water. I mean, like, I fished cribs the size of this, you know, this dance floor area right here that were 4 feet high and were made with, you know, logs that you couldn't get your arms around. And that's fun fishing with a camera because, you know, you're trying to thread your hooks and stuff through those little pockets, and it's pinpoint accuracy. So you're literally moving your line over in the hole. You're drilling a hole next to your hole to try to get it in between a board or something to drop it into those cribs. That's when I've had the value out of the camera. But it's like really, really specific situations like that. Not for what most people would think about using the camera for, or using them to spot fish. You know. The tournament thing that I used to do, I mean, we would have to really move and move and move, and so the flasher doesn't tell you about the weed beds and everything all around what's going on, and the camera will. You can tell if it's green weeds, which is what we're usually looking for because it means more oxygen, or you can see travel corridors. How many guys deer hunting here? I could do a whole seminar just on this side of it, but just real quick, deer use runways, right? I mean, when you're out scouting for deer, you're looking for runways. When we're scouting for fish, a lot of times we're looking for runways with cameras. So that sounds pretty weird, right? But the reality of it is a lot of these fish in these weed beds, they use the weed beds just like a deer uses runways in the woods. There's fields, you know, those open pockets that everybody tries to get in to fish, right? Like if you're smart in the fall, you go out there and you'll ride around with your boat and you'll GPS all the big open pockets. And then you can walk out there with your GPS in the wintertime and jump right down into one of those open pockets and catch panfish like crazy. Because that's just like a deer standing out in the middle of a field grazing, okay? Fish do the exact same thing. They're just like the rest of the animal world. And there'll be runways literally underneath the water, only three-dimensional. There'll be runways right on the bottom. There'll be runways like through the weeds halfway up. There'll be intersections of runways. There'll be places where they turn and go around obstacles. And you'll see that with the camera down there. It's crazy. You'll literally see where the fish have knocked the algae off of the weeds going through. Sometimes they're pike that are doing it. Sometimes it's bass. Sometimes it's bluegills and perch.
And they're almost predictable like a deer.
They are, I mean, but just like deer, right? I mean, it's predictable as deer in that you're never there when the big one's there, right? But yeah, they are. But if you get on an intersection, and that's a reason why you can be out there and your buddy's sitting right there next to you, and he's pounding fish like crazy in that hole. And you're 5 feet away, and you can't get bit. Well, he might be sitting in an intersection, okay? But he might also, you might just have a chunk of weed between you and those fish over there too, so they can't see your bait. But either way, it's the same thing as like with deer and everything else. So it's important that you're at a high travel location.
You walk out of Geno's to 6 feet of water, punch a hole. You punch generally one hole at a time, you don't fish 2 rods?
I fish with one rod, but I'll punch multiple holes if I'm gonna take the time to make noise. Unless I'm walking up on a group of guys that's already fishing, and I'm gonna be respectful, so I'm not gonna try to make a whole bunch of noise. But if I'm listening in an area and I'm just setting up, I'm gonna cut a few holes right out of the word.
You walk out to a half mile off of Geno's, 7 feet of water, 6:30 in the morning, you punch 7, 8 holes, 10, 20 feet apart. You set up. When you go down the first night, are you going to go down slowly to the bottom, or are you going to go down 2 feet 2 minutes, 3 minutes, go down 2 feet more, give it 3 minutes until you get to the bottom. You're gonna look on your electronics while you're doing it. I guess I'm just curious, what's your thought first thing in the morning? Because I go out there, I take my little depth pin, clip it on, and drop it down, get 6 inches off the bottom, put a spike or a minnow on, and I go down.
I'm going to check every hole with the flasher before I even drop. And then I'm going to go to what I think is the best looking hole. It might have fish. If it's got fish in it, then I'm going to drop right then and there. And I'm going to drop slow, and I'm going to hold up above them and see if I can get them to come up, or to see if there's any fish higher that just aren't showing up in the flasher.
So just like we do softwater.
Yep.
I drive around
Yep.
and mark the fish. You do it in a smaller area.
I'm going to check the holes and
You
see
drill them,
see
you
what
drop
looks
them
good.
down and check.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And then you start off about what the mark should look like.
Yep.
Along the same story, what's your go-to jig? First thing you throw down?
Lake St Clair.
Chartreuse with orange swirl epoxy. If I'm not fishing just perch, if I'm out on a perch hunt, I'm going to drop down a bead spoon. It's going to probably be a number 2 nickel willow with a red bead. It's going to be the first thing I'm going to drop down there for perch.
Both sides nickel.
Yeah, just chrome nickel, whatever you want to call it. Just
Red bead or yellow bead?
red bead.
Red bead.
Yep, I'm just old school that way. The second one I would drop down would be a chartreuse bead on it.
With this chrome, yeah.
Yep, yep.
You go chrome, sunny day, brass. or-
I'll drop chrome any day for perch.
Sure, okay.
But that's going to be my go-to unless I know otherwise. I mean, if I know there's been a good bite going on, and like I like to use oranges and chartreuses or watermelon combinations out here too. I've got an advantage now though, because I get to hear all your guys' stories coming in, so I already know what color patterns are going. But I usually have the order I would go through would be the nickel, then I would go with something really bright like an orange and chartreuse combo, and then if I still can't get them going on a bead spoon, I'd put something really dark down there that's got like black or purple, and maybe a copper back.
So not necessarily a squid, you go with, or a tube, you go with.
Well, I'll have a rod rigged with a tube. I'll have a rod rigged for live bait.
But you'll drop the beads.
Yep, but the bead's going to be the first one I drop down for perch. If I was going out there for pumpkin seeds, I would drop down a 4mm tungsten. It just depends on what I'm doing.
How about Swedish pimples? Do you use them?
No, I'll use a willow dropper, something with a dropper chain on it, but generally not a pimple. It's just never been. It doesn't mean they don't work. I know a lot of guys catch a ton of fish on them, but it's just not my thing.
I switch into the single one.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry.
No, the question everybody wants to know, if you were in the cold as ice tournament Saturday morning, where would you fish? Somewhere between the day sail ramp and Gino's. Or down on the rocks on the corner on the end by the basketball court. And really tight, tighter than you would expect.
South of Gino's? Where's the basketball?
The end of Metro at the rocks.
End of Metro at the rocks. Used to be in casting distance, and in the fall you could get them in there real heavy. Right?
That's about right.
Yeah.
The trick to fishing there is fishing the humps. You're fishing the sand riffles. You want to get in the trough of the sand riffle.
Yeah, just like fishing the trough for the salmon and stuff over on Lake Michigan. John, thank you very much. Give John Brand a little bit more. We're going to take a short break. And then be sure to see him up at his store right there next to the Crocker launch. Al McMurray is going to have a 50-50 going around. Let's take about 15-20 minutes. Thank you all.